Okay, so we're back with members of the community on the Upper East Side, small business owners, small property owners, parents of children, community advocates throughout the city for shelters and NYCHA housing. And, you know, there's a couple of questions we didn't get to during our moderated session. So I'm going to kick it off with something that's, you know, up for grabs right now, which is good cause eviction. Isabel, can you pose your question to Russell Squire, who's running for State Assembly in the 73rd District on the Upper East Side?
Yes, so there's only 2 days left of the current session. So if good cause eviction isn't passed on the next couple of days, it will be up before the legislature, most probably next year. If you're elected, what is your position on this issue?
So I think it's important to do, you know, to try and help long-term tenants and to do, you know, what we can to help them stay in their homes. I think the sort of specifics of this particular bill, you know, I don't want to do anything that's going to prevent, you know, essentially, you know, the concern that I have is that it's going to lead to a lack of rental housing being built. And so I think really the essential thing is to make sure and to try and find that balance of how can we help residents stay in their homes, long-term residents, and that's something that I know that, you know, property owners care about as well, but also ensuring that we're doing it in a way that's still going to allow for the creation of new rental housing. And, you know, we have to be, I think, practical and sort of realistic about that, and, you know, not create a situation where only condos are being built, because that's not going to help the city or the affordable housing situation either.
But can I ask one more question quickly? There's a proposal out there because of HSTPA that a lot of apartments aren't being renovated because we're only allowed to get a return on the investment $15,000 or below. And a lot of these apartments have been occupied for 50 years and need obviously a lot more than $15,000 worth of work. Would you support any kind of bill to amend the HSTPA to allow us to receive a greater return on investment, more than $15,000?
Yeah, I'm open to that. I think basically, you know, the problem, and I think how this came about, is there was a situation where there were circumstances where I would say, I think, you know, there were pretextual repairs being made, and there were situations where repairs were being made solely for the purpose of trying to justify increases and not that they were necessary. And that was what the bill was targeting, and that's what the changes in the law were targeting. And I think in many cases, or you know, I think what may have happened is it was, you know, they used an axe when they should have used a scalpel. And so obviously, you know, people who have actually been doing the right thing and have just been trying to keep their property in good condition, they were swept in with the changes. And so I think if we can find a way to sort of distinguish between repairs that are actually necessary in a way to make sure that those are going to be made, as opposed to things that are sort of pretextual and just trying to raise rent on stabilized tenants for, you know, for the sake of raising rent, you know, distinguishing between those and finding a way to do that, I think is something that might make sense. But it does make sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alfonso, do you have a question that maybe we didn't get to? I don't think Cynthia's on right now, so.
No, Nicole, I don't have no questions. I'm just, you know, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Hunter, did you have a question? I know I didn't get to some of the education, so if you want to hit on some of the education questions.
Yeah, I would really love to hear from you about how you think the state legislature could ensure that kids from kind of all levels, kids that are behind grade level, kids that are on grade level, and especially those kids that are often overlooked, those kids that are ahead of grade level, how those kids can be served and how we can get a system that ensures that each of those kids get the appropriate education and the appropriate challenge for them, so they all make a year of progress every school year.
So I think it's very important that we, you know, so starting with the kids who are, you know, ahead and doing well, I think it's important that we maintain the gifted and talented program. I think it's important, and this latter one is a state issue, maintaining the specialized high school tests. You know, I think that's very important, and that is a state issue. And as I mentioned, you know, parents have to feel comfortable that the school system is going to allow them to allow the children to excel and go as far as their talents will take them. And if they don't feel that that's the case, they're not going to stay in the city, because no one's going to, you know, do anything to essentially, hamstring their children's future. So I think that's very, very important. And I think there are things that we can do to make sure that everyone all over the city has access to these programs and make sure that we're providing better educational outcomes in some of the underserved communities to better enable them to take advantage of programs like this and to have more people from those areas qualify. A big issue ultimately when it comes to education and the state is funding. And so ensuring that schools on the east side are getting our fair share of funding and have the funding that they need to make sure that we have more school seats, to have the smaller class sizes, to have the full range of programming that we need, from arts and music to also programs and support services to help kids who have fallen behind, kids who are struggling. I will say I'm very proud to have the support of the 504 Democratic Club, which advocates for people with disabilities. And so ensuring that we have the necessary services and that we're funding programs to help special needs students is really important. And again, a lot of that really comes down to getting the money from Albany. And that's why it's important to have somebody in office who's going to be effective and going to be able to actually get those results for our community.
Thank you.
Yeah, 10.
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I brought up public safety as a big concern for the Asian community, and there is a bill actively being pushed, and we'll see if it gets passed, called the Clean Slate Bill. I don't know if you're familiar with that. There are a lot of concerns we have, but in particular, the fact that the biometric data will not be accessible for solving future cases is of ultimate concern. And similar to the bail reform, it is a very vague and sweeping type of bill without any details. If it is not passed this session, it will be up probably next session. What are your thoughts on that?
So with the Clean Slate Act, I think one of the important provisions in the legislation is the amount of time between, when a person is released and when the clean slate aspect kicks in. And so I think that is going to protect against a lot of the concerns that we've seen. It's years where somebody has to, not have reoffended and actually been, demonstrating essentially that they not only have paid their debt to society, but that they have committed to participating in and being a law-abiding person and doing that. And so I think with that period of years between when a person's record is expunged and when they get released, I think that's an appropriate safeguard.
Right now, it's 3 years and 7 years for felonies. Do you feel that's appropriate?
Yeah, I think 3 years and 7 years, I think that's an appropriate level.
Thank you for being honest.
Hey, Jackie Rowe Adams from Harlem Mothers Save, who joined us. Jackie is, fighting against gun violence. She lost her sons to gun violence. She is, rallying for changes in bail reform. Jackie, I will say before you come on that we already addressed Russell supports the modification for judicial discretion for bail reform, but is there a question you have about any of the other bills that are currently being reviewed in Albany, or any legislation that you want to understand his position on?
Yes, I want to understand your position. Of course, I'm so glad one thing about Inform, they always touch on that bail reform because it's so crucial in all the issues that's plaguing us. But one of the things that I heard that got very silent is raise the age. So how do you feel about raising the age? And look at how the young men, the 18-year-olds and, the young people are able to go purchase these guns, and these guns that's really, I didn't even know they exist. So how do you feel about the raise the age? And that's one of the things that we did talk about with the legislators.
Yeah, well, this came up before, and I think, when it comes to guns, I think we have to take it very, very seriously. And so I think we have to really make sure that gun possession is going to be treated very seriously, and increasing the penalties there, and in particular increasing the penalties for people who provide children with a gun, and also relatedly, making sure that there's an obligation on parents and adults to store their guns safely and prevent their guns from getting into the hands of children, I think is really, really essential. And making it an enforcement priority to keep illegal guns out of our city and our state, and taking additional action to have more penalties for gun trafficking and making it easier to prosecute gun trafficking.
Thank you. Absolutely. Just one more. When you raised the issue just now, gun trafficking, we have to appeal to people. This is so serious. That's where a lot of these guns are coming from, out of state, out of town, and they're bringing them here and they're using them to kill each other. And we must, the AFT, they say they on board, the federal, we really have to take this serious of this gun trust. So many guns are getting in these kids' hands. They're getting more guns than they're buying candy. So how do you feel about that? And you did touch on it.
Yeah, and one of the things I mentioned before also, I've been recognized as a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action, the nationwide gun control group. And this is actually an area where I think it's really, we're entering a very sort of dangerous time in our country and for our state, where, what other states are doing and what I'll say, frankly, Republicans in the federal government are doing is really extreme. And I think it's more important than ever that here in New York State, we be able to maintain our values and maintain our laws and the kinds of policies that we want. And on things like gun control, that's particularly important. And so having leadership in Albany and leadership in the state legislature that's going to be able to stand up to these forces that we're seeing all over the country and the way that those are going to impact us. I mean, we're on the verge of a Supreme Court decision that could seriously hinder our ability to have meaningful gun control here. So we need to have the ability, and we need legislators who are going to be able to defend what we have here in New York and defend our laws and make sure that we're able to put in place the policies that we want here and to fight back against that and to lead the country, to lead in the National Conference of State Legislators and to do that. And again, with my experience, I'm the candidate who's going to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Russ, can you just for me confirm your positions? Because some people think if you're a Democratic candidate that you will uphold abortion rights and same-sex marriage. That said, there are a couple of candidates on the Republican side and the Democratic side, Jumaane Williams on the Democratic side and Lee Zeldin, who personally don't support abortion or same-sex marriage. What is your position, just briefly, because it's been a hot topic in the news, on abortion rights and same-sex marriage and upholding those rights if elected?
I support both of those. I support abortion and the right to an abortion. I support same-sex marriage. And those are two, I'm glad you brought that up, because that goes to what I was just talking about. I mean, these are issues also where the rights that people have are under threat nationally and in other states, and making sure that we're preserving our rights, preserving the right to an abortion here in New York, preserving the right to same-sex marriage and other LGBTQ plus rights. That's critically important. And again, it's going to take experienced leadership to get that done. And that's something that we really need to do. And I think we need to move aggressively to preserve the rights that we have here in New York.
Thank you. I think we didn't touch on this earlier, but do you support mayoral control of schools? Right now, there's a lot of pushback in Albany. What is your position on that?
I do. I support it. And I think if you compare mayoral control to what we had before, and the Board of Education really was not working. And I think having that clear accountability, I think is very, very important. So I'm a supporter of mayoral control.
Thank you. And what do you think about the pandemic now? So we're into year 3, I guess I call it. And for many of us that are parents, we suffer through homeschooling, school closures, and significant learning loss. There's some position that Governor Hochul and her Department of Health commissioner want to expand the right to enforce vaccine mandates outside of a pandemic. Do you support that, or do you support it for emergency reasons such as COVID, when we did not have vaccines or anything else available?
So I think the COVID vaccine should be treated the way that other vaccines are treated. So I think in other situations where a vaccine is required, I don't see any reason why the COVID vaccine shouldn't be able to be added to that list. I think it's a vaccine like any other. I think in terms of COVID, I think it's very important. I think we're all very focused on the need to come back strong from the pandemic and ensure that we're helping our small businesses do that. Just to talk about the issue of small business, which had been touched on previously, which I didn't get to. I mentioned I testified in the City Council Small Business Committee, and I mentioned not only the problem of shoplifting, but also the need to streamline points of contact in the government for small businesses. So instead of making them deal individually with multiple agencies, on the government side, we can do a lot of that streamlining and coordination, and then give them one point of contact for the businesses, right? I think that's really important. And then similarly, not enforcing sort of nuisance fines and fees. In many cases, I think small business owners want to do the right thing. They may make a mistake. And in that case, if you tell them what the issue is, they'll fix it and they'll address it and you will have solved the problem. And slapping a punitive fine on them doesn't really do anybody any good. It impacts their ability to employ local New Yorkers and their ability to stay in business. So those, I think, are some common sense things that we can do to help our small businesses come back from the pandemic.
Thank you. And I just saw that Cynthia came back, and I know she's busy today with Zoom. So Cynthia, can you just ask your NYCHA question real quick, and then Irving, you're next.
Yes, apologies. NYCHA's got us on Zoom at the same time. Number one, are you familiar with RAD, PACT, and now the NYCHA Preservation Trust that's being introduced today to the in Albany?
Some, I think the privatization proposals are things that I don't support.
Okay, and the other part of privatization that they're doing during a pandemic is NYCHA now has full control as to what you get put into, whether it be the Preservation Trust or into RAD and PACT. NYCHA residents don't understand what's going on. They're looking for electeds to understand that all of our rules and all of our safeties are under the HUD regulations. And once you privatize us, we lose those rules. HUD no longer will be governing us. You're leaving it under the control of the mayor and the CEO of NYCHA, which, no offense, we're not with.
Yeah, well, I'm not in favor of lowering the standards when it comes to safety. I think it's very, very important to maintain that. And I'm in favor of maintaining the HUD standards. And, I think it's very, very important that we do a lot more when it comes to NYCHA and repairs there. I think the fact that there's so much lead paint in NYCHA housing still after all these years is unconscionable, and we have to do more to fix it. I think the long waits that we have for repairs are terrible. And I think too often when the repairs are done, they're not effective and they're done in a sort of slipshod way. And so making sure that we actually are investing what we need in NYCHA to ensure that the repairs are being made that we need, I think is really critical. And also I think in anything involving NYCHA, I think it's really, really vital to have the residents' voices be heard. And I think too often the residents are shut out of the discussion and shut out of the conversation. And I think we've seen that in discussions of privatization. And I'm very proud that, this came up in the community board context, and we were strong defenders of NYCHA and the NYCHA houses in our community and helping them fight back against a proposal to privatize part of their campus. So that's something that I believe in very fervently.
Russell, we just have a minute left. So I just want Irving, if you could come on camera and just ask your question real quick. Irving has a question regarding the jails.
No, I actually have something. I'm putting on my Spony hat today.
Okay, go ahead.
I came in late, and I had a question about the fact that there are apparently 40,000 regulated vacant apartments as a consequence of the 2019 HSTPA laws. And coupled with the question of the homelessness that's occurring right now, I was wondering what's your position on this question? Because with all these vacancies that are happening, I'm trying to work with Brian Kavanaugh to try to get these vacancies removed and have these making housing more available for the homeless. What is your position on this question? Because right now there's no movement. There's 40,000 vacancies. So as a consequence of the 2019 HSTPA laws, what's your position on making the fundamental changes? Because there's so much homelessness in the system right now, and yet there's all these vacancies, and there's a mismatch. Why? And yet money's being spent to house homeless in hotels at a much more greater rate. What gives? What do you think is the solution to this?
Yeah, so I think we have to look at what the obstacles are to renting out those units, and I think we need to address that. And so I think if there are concerns about, repairs that need to be made, then we need to address that and solve that issue so that we can actually get, get these units into use and not have them sitting vacant, because that doesn't help anybody. But I do also think that we have an opportunity here to take advantage of some of the empty spaces that we have at various different parts of the city in terms of, vacant commercial space and some of the other kinds of properties that we have, and, take advantage of the opportunity we have to create more affordable housing. And I think we also, there's an opportunity here with the expiration of 421A to have a better system that's actually going to get us more affordability, because what we've seen is that we really haven't gotten the results in terms of having more affordable units from the current program that we really want to see. And so I think fixing that's another really.
Would you consider amending the HSTPA laws as a consequence of these policies?
I think we certainly don't want a situation where housing is sitting unused because it can't be repaired. So I think trying to address that problem and making fixes to fix that issue, I think that's something that we need to do.
Hey, Russell, I don't mean to cut you guys off. This was a great discussion. I just want to, first of all, thank you for your time. I do want to ask, do you support the borough-based jails and believe that a new brick and mortar is going to solve problems that when people come out that they just stop committing crime? What is your position on that?
So I think we've seen, the conditions at Rikers are really awful. They're horrible. So, we have to do something about that. We have to solve that. And I do think it would be good if we made it easier for people to get services, easier for people to see their families. So, that's not to say that the proposals for the borough-based jails don't have problems. I think there are real concerns there. And I think with everything, and this comes from having, being a community board chair, I think having community input and having meaningful community input that actually is listened to by government and elected leaders, and having people actually take that into account, I think is essential. So, I think we have to, I do think, closing Rikers makes sense, but in terms of what comes next, I think, there's a lot more to be done there in terms of incorporating what the community's concerns are and addressing those, and doing it in a way that people are going to feel comfortable with, and that's actually going to solve the issues that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Russell. Just before you go, is there anything you'd like to say to the group in closing? And then we're going to let you go.
So I'm really running, as I mentioned, on my experience, on my demonstrated commitment to the community from years of being involved here, years of digging into local issues, years of working with the community, working with local activists, working with local involved citizens to try and solve these problems, and to do it in a practical and common sense way. And that's the experience that I've had. That's the demonstrated commitment that I have. And I want to take that experience and I want to continue to be a voice, but to do it in Albany. My campaign is really of the community, by the community, for the community. It's a grassroots effort, and being that voice to make sure that our issues are actually being heard. That's why I'm running in this race.
Thank you, Russell. And thank you to all of the community leaders and the residents from the Upper East Side who joined to pose our questions today so that we can share them with our larger memberships and communities. I want to thank you, Russell Squire, candidate for 73rd State Assembly Representative. The elections are June 28th. Please go to your groups and your members. Many of you have hundreds and thousands of members. You have to get them to get their absentee ballots and make sure that everybody is registered to vote. That is June 1 for registering, and I believe June 15th for absentee ballots. I know so many of my friends won't be here on election day, so we really need to make sure that if you like Russell, what he has to say, that you communicate that and other people who are running and get them to vote. Russell, thank you for your time. We're going to switch over to our next call today. So we're going to say bye to you, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ.
Nicole, sorry.
Hey, Jackie, I'm running about 4 minutes over, so I just want to bring the next
Okay.
candidate in, and we'll get
Okay.
as much as we can. So he should be in the waiting room, and I just want to get
But
him in.
anyway,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
yeah, no worries. If you guys can just come on camera when you pose your question, or at least have a screenshot. It just looks a little bit better for the